I know it's a bit early in the year, but I am going to add a new category. I'm proposing a new category. We'd love to hear your feedback on it for the 2024 Besties. Most based CEO. Lots of options to choose from right now, which we'll get into in a minute. But there seems to be a bit of a vibe shift happening in tech during peak ZERP and cancel culture, 2019 to 2021 era. It seemed like CEOs were a little vigilant about what they would say, the Tim Cooks, the Sundars, but something has clearly changed. Tech CEOs have gotten radically candid and fired their comms group. Two great examples this week that we were talking about. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, had this awesome clip when speaking at Stanford's Graduate School of Business.
I think one of my great advantages is that I have very low expectations. And I mean that. Most of the Stanford graduates have very high expectations. People with very high expectations have very low resilience. And unfortunately, resilience matters in success. I don't know how to teach it to you except for I hope suffering happens to you. To this day, I use the phrase pain and suffering inside our company with great glee. Boy, this is going to cause a lot of pain and suffering. And I mean that in a happy way because you want to train, you want to refine the character of your company. You want greatness out of them. And greatness is not intelligence. Greatness comes from character. And character is informed out of smart people. It's formed out of people who suffered.
And then next up, Palantir CEO Alex Karp called out the coked up short sellers on CNBC.
I love burning the short sellers. Like almost nothing makes a human happier than taking the lines of cocaine and away from these short sellers who are going short on a truly great American company, not just ours, but just love pulling down great American companies so that they can pay for their coke. And the best thing that could happen to them is we will lead their coke dealers to their homes after they can't pay their bills. That's like one of my...
Surely all short sellers.
Yeah, well, go ahead, habits. Do your thing, we'll do our thing.
There you have it, folks. Of course, we had Elon's great good for you at some New York Times conference, always candid. And even Zuckerberg, he's been getting a little based. He did a whole video about how the Apple Vision Pro was when compared to Meta's Quest 2. He's getting a little frisky on the social media. Freeberg, is the vibe shift real?
It seems like a lot of people are less worried about cancel culture as they were 3 years ago. So I don't know if it's just in Silicon Valley, broadly in media, and broadly culturally, there seems to be a move away from cancel culture mentality, and people are speaking their mind more, which is, I think obviously positive and refreshing.
Sachs, you're a big fan of freedom of speech. Your thoughts on this vibe shift? Is this related to cancel culture kind of ending and journalists just not being able to cancel people because they misspoke or were a little spicy in their takes?
Well, I like the fact that these CEOs are all being colorful in their remarks and candid and interesting, and that's always a good thing. In each of these cases, I kind of like what they had to say, but I think that you might, or we collectively might be reading a little bit too much into this. I mean, at the end of the day, what sacred cows are they really challenging? What real dangerous truths are they speaking? What real risks are they taking? I just don't put any of the things that they're saying or doing in the same category as, say, what Elon has been doing in terms of taking on the powers that be, in terms of rolling back censorship and promoting free speech on X. I mean, Elon, I think, has taken some real risks in doing that, and you see that he's paying the price with all these government investigations and the voiding of his compensation package. That, I think, is just in a slightly different category of true risk-taking by speaking truth to power or allowing the masses to speak truth to power compared to what these other guys are doing. And I'm not disparaging any of them, but look at them one by one. I mean, Alex Karp made a colorful joke at the expense of short traders. I agree, but it's not really a risky remark. Jensen Huang is giving some tough love to Stanford students. He's giving them, I think, a good lesson of stop being so entitled, go get some real life experience, be resilient. Okay, great message. I saw the Zuckerberg clip, liked it as well. He's basically speaking from a place of passion about his own product and comparing it to Apple. Okay, great. That's what he's supposed to do. I don't see any of those CEOs again, if you want to compare it to Elon, taking a really dangerous political stance. In fact, remember when Zuckerberg got dragged to Capitol Hill and gave that testimony, and they demanded that he give that apology, he did it. I mean,
he genuflected.
I thought that word was banned on this pod.
No, only when applied to me.
Okay, God.
Yeah.
Anybody else can be genuflecting. I mean, I thought he was just showing some humanity, which is, kind of paradoxical.
Look, I get it in that moment, but I'm just saying that, like, if you want to put it in the same category as Elon, the thing to do would have been to punch back. And I think in that moment, it was who? It was Josh Hawley. The thing to do would have been to say, no, it's you who are exploiting the misery and suffering of all of these people by trying to score political points. So anyway,
that
I don't
would
want
have
to
been
pick
super
on,
based. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been super based. So all I'm saying is that it's one thing for these founders and CEOs to be colorful and candid or whatever. That's all great. But have they really taken political courage?
Your thoughts, Chamath, on based CEOs?
Well, I think, Jason, the takeaway, I think you're almost on the right point, but not quite. I don't think this is based or not based. I think the point is everybody is exhausted with the multiple layers of word scrambled gymnastics that people have had to play. And they're like, enough's enough. I think the more interesting way to look at this is that there was a few year period where a lot of companies were under a lot of pressure and folks felt that they couldn't say what was on their mind to really fix the problems that they saw. Now you have, both of the companies and the CEOs you pointed out are firing on all cylinders as far as anybody can tell from the outside. And there's a certain level of political capital that comes with that. And they're choosing to spend it. And I think that's the interesting takeaway, which is as these companies become successful again, as tech reemerges again from this multi-year malaise, are folks going to find their voice or not? And I think that's the big point, which is that it seems, at least that we can see, this next generation of winning companies seems to have CEOs that will take a different path. They'll be maybe closer to Elon than closer to a politician.
Yeah, I loved Wong's comments just about his secret weapon is he has incredibly low expectations.
By the way, if you had said that comment a few years ago, the whole pain and suffering thing, somebody would have said, I felt triggered. It touched my childhood trauma. I had X, Y, and Z happen to me. And it's not that those people don't have valid claims, but they would have aired it in a way that tried to get him canceled effectively.
Yeah, he would be out of touch. He would be talking down to people. He'd be a billionaire telling people like to suck it up. What does he know?
And by the way, in fairness, I bet you there are people that felt that way even today when listening to his clip. The thing that is different, though, was the rest of us who also have had pain and suffering in our lives retweeted it and was just like, this is 100% awesome.
Yeah, I mean, finally, candid advice. Elon used to always say, happiness equals, this was his happiness formula, happiness equals reality minus expectations. And so if your expectations are really high and reality doesn't hit it, you're going to be sad. And if you keep your expectations low and reality's, okay or good, yeah, you could be happy in life. But Freiberg, I just love of those quotes, maybe some thoughts about suffering and how hard it is. You're back in the CEO seat. How's that been going for you, generally speaking? How hard is it compared to being a capital allocator? I'm curious. I was going to talk to you about that offline anyway.
I probably have an unhealthy affinity for suffering. I think that if you come from certain backgrounds, you're sort of trained that that's the place that your unconscious tends to want to be.
Mm.
And I think that also, some people call it chips on shoulders. Some people call it motivation. I mean, look at your friend Elon, how much suffering he puts himself through. I think it's a requisite to greatness is you have to really find ways to sacrifice. Now, if I've said this a lot, there's a reason a lot of people that have had success in their career don't end up being great entrepreneurs. Because as soon as you're faced with failure for the first time, it doesn't pattern match to what's happened to you historically. I go to a good school, I get good grades, I go to Stanford, I get a degree. Everything about every step you do, you're told if you do X, you will get Y. And then you do X and you get Y and you repeat. And at some point, you're considered successful in your education, in your career, and so on. If you then decide that entrepreneurship is the path for you, you realize that entrepreneurship is that there is no if X, then Y. There is if X, maybe Y, maybe Z, maybe 100 other things that'll smack you in the face. And that experience is shockingly different for people that have historically followed a path of success, of what's defined as success culturally, socially. And I think that that's really what he's speaking to. If you've grown up where all of your expectations have not been met, or many of the expectations have not been met, you realize that persistence, grit, perseverance, relentlessness, these are the necessary traits to be successful in entrepreneurship. And I think that I find myself much happier in that condition than in any other condition. And it's why I'm actually very happy in the work I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot with me. And all the entrepreneurs that I back, they all have that chip. And you got to be careful not to get caught up in the trappings and really focus on solving problems. If you think about what a CEO does all day, you hire the smartest team you know, you give them the biggest challenges, as much autonomy as you can, and then they return back to you with all the problems the smartest people you could find to join your team can't fix. So then your life becomes essentially, what's left over that is the most brutal to solve. And, there's only a certain percentage of people who can do that day in and day out, just relentlessly be faced with.
How do you reconcile that statement, Jason, with the proposition that people should become entrepreneurs generally? I think that this really challenges me. Whenever people say I'm thinking about starting a company, my first response is no, don't. Like, you have to be told over and over again to not start a company, to test if they actually have the resilience and grit necessary just to take the first step of starting the company. This notion that everyone should be encouraged to start a company and entrepreneurism is a career choice, I think is a false notion. I think that most people are not psychologically equipped for being successful in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I've gotten in my later years, as we run like Founder University, these programs, when people are applying and we only accept 10% into the programs and then only invest in 10% of those. So net, like less than 1% get funded. I'll ask them, they're like, oh, can you give us money so I can get a co-founder? And I'm like, you know what? You failed the first test of being an entrepreneur. The first test of being an entrepreneur is, can you convince 2 or 3 people to go on this crazy journey with you because it's important and without money? And, people expect, oh, you're going to just give them the money because they have an interesting idea. And then I asked them, what's your skill? What do you do at the startup? Do you sell the product? Do you build the product? And a lot of people do not have the wherewithal to add a skill that the world needs. Being a developer, a UX designer, a salesperson, whatever it is, right? They don't have any skill. And then they also have no ability to convince somebody else with skills to start a company. If you can't have marketable, important skills yourself that you taught yourself on your own through sheer force of motivation and will and opening up YouTube, which really isn't that hard, people. Like, anybody can learn to code, to be a UX designer, to be a salesperson. All this is on some online course, some book, some YouTube video, some podcast. So just learn some marketable skills that a startup needs. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be a founder.
I think the point is that everybody's capable of being a founder and anybody can and should start a company. It's just that very few can finish a company. And that is the resilience part, where there's just so many ups and downs and you have to be able to roll and survive. And you have to just problem solve constantly. And yeah, there are very few people that are cut out for it.
You have to be comfortable with failure. You have to be comfortable with expectations not being met. That's the important point that he's making. I can't tell you how important it was early in my career. I had several cold calling jobs where I cold called college kids, I cold called alumni, I cold called CEOs. I had 3 different cold calling jobs and getting rejection after rejection, failing in my life. I didn't get into any schools except for Berkeley because Berkeley didn't take teacher recommendations. Teachers, I did not do well in school. And then playing poker taught me a lot, because playing poker, you lose hands, you lose hands, you lose hands, you lose hands. You have to just make sure that you're making the right decisions. And over time, the money will come to you. The positive EV will be there. But failure and persisting through failure, I think, was one of the most important traits I had to develop before I was even ready to start a company, because all that's happening every day is failure.
When I had my first magazine, I didn't understand. I had just printed photocopies of it, and I had like 2,000 copies of this magazine, Silicon Valley Reporter, and I didn't know how to get them in people's hands. So I just got a luggage cart, like a literal luggage cart. I put them in the luggage cart, and I walked around Lower Manhattan, and I just dropped them off at internet companies, and I dropped them off at cafes, and then I went to all the Village Voice boxes, and I just slotted them in between the Village Voice. And miraculously, people found it, and then they would subscribe. And, just whatever it took was the approach.